Hello, General Biology, and I think you just heard Nico barking. Somebody came to the door, and then I wound up having a little bit of a technical issue and had to leave off. So I might have a little bit of an overlap because I didn't mark down where I left off, and I didn't go back and review what I had recorded. But I believe that we were taking a look at logistic growth, and here's a graph that shows logistic growth, and it starts with an exponential growth curve where it's J-shaped, and that suggests that resources are unlimited, and whatever the organism is, the species, they're able to thrive and grow and increase in number quite well until they reach this point, and then that's when resources become limited and the numbers of that population growth slows down. It either levels off like we see here, or it takes a drop, builds back up, levels off a little bit, and it continues this pattern, making an S-shaped curve. And that is a logistic growth curve, and that's how we can tell if it's an S shape. We know that it's logistic. Now, we saw this when we did the deer activity in class, when we had equal amount of deer and equal amounts of the environment to meet their needs. We saw that the deer were able to reproduce and increase in numbers, but their reproduction and increase of numbers depleted the environment significantly. So with less environmental factors available for them, the next season, a large number of the deer population died, restoring that environmental factors that they needed, where they would be able to grow and increase. And what that was showing was something that we called carrying capacity, which you see defined here as the maximum number of individuals of a particular species that a particular environment can support. So a logistic growth curve is used in showing that carrying capacity has been reached. The environment can no longer support that exponential growth. And sometimes, a lot of times, we see larger declines in the population before they go back up again. So let's take a look at the things that actually limit or can impact the growth of a population. Okay, so this brings us to section 5.2, limits to growth. And you might remember we've been talking about limiting nutrients. And that's when we get a nutrient that affects the productivity of an organism. Well, we're going to change that nutrient word to factors. And we're going to have limiting factors because there's other things besides nutrients that are going to have an impact on the productivity of a population, of a group of individuals. So these factors can determine the carrying capacity of that environment. You know, when we did the deer population activity, we talked about food and water and shelter as the needs. Well, what if shelter was not available? And it wasn't available for all of them, so some of them are going to die off because they could not get that shelter. So that's a factor. It's not a nutrient, it's a factor. And this is something that we often have to consider, where we don't overrun the planet. Right now, our human population is growing exponentially. We're at 7.4 billion people, and in 2025, we're projected to be at 9 billion people. So that's in your lifetime. By 2050, they're expecting 11 billion people, and that's still within your lifetime. And they're saying at 11 billion, we're going to reach our carrying capacity for the number of humans that the planet is going to be able to support. So limiting factors, you know, that might sound terrible, and it is. It actually keeps the population somewhere between extinction and overrunning the planet. So it's a way of keeping population numbers in check. So we're going to talk about two different kinds of limiting factors. And one of those is called a density-dependent limiting factor. And if I just move the screen up a little bit, the other one is referred to as a density-independent limiting factor. And one of the easiest ways to remember which is anything that's density dependent, it's biotic. It requires living. So when we talked about predator-prey relationships briefly in competition, that predator-prey relationship, that predator is living, the prey is living, and the number of predators is dependent on the availability of the prey. So that is density dependent. So anything that's biotic, anything that's living. So you heard me say the word competition. We're going to talk about competition. Let's say we have 3 birds in a nest, and they're baby birds. They're going to squawk for mom and dad to feed them. And the one that squawks the most is going to get the most food. So if there's one that kind of gets butted out every now and then, the brother and sister might decide just to kick that other one out of the nest, and it reduces that competition. I don't know why I can't talk today. So that is density dependent. It depends on the mom and dad and the availability of the food and the competition between the 3 siblings. So we talked about predation, having a predator and prey. Herbivory would be those herbivores that feed off the plants and the availability of the plants to be there for the herbivores. Parasitism. A parasite, a tick, isn't going to be able to survive if it can't get onto a deer or a dog or some kind of animal in order to get the blood for nutrients. Disease is also a density-dependent factor. Diseases can't spread without a population being there. And stress from overcrowding is also density-dependent. They depend on the number of individuals within a given area. So, taking a look at competition a little bit further, this involves overcrowding, and I go back to the deer activity that we did. When you had more deer and less resources, you had competition. Who could get to those resources first? And I even saw some people cheating where they changed what they wanted midstream because they didn't want to die. So it's competition for those natural resources. The more individuals that live in an area, the more they're going to use up the food, the water, the shelter that is available. Predation and herbivory relationships. And predations are where we have the predators and the prey. So the sharks going to the seals. The predators have an effect on the prey. The prey are usually herbivores. They're organisms that would eat the producers. So if the predators eat a lot of the prey, then that's going to allow the plants to grow. Or if we've got an overabundance of prey, then they've eaten quite a bit of the plants, and that's going to give more food to the predators. Again, here we go. It's density dependent based on the number that you have. Most predators eat herbivores, which eat the plants that in turn prevent overgrowth of a plant species. Let's take a look. Here's a really good graph that takes into account the wolf and the moose population. The wolves are the predators, and the moose are the prey. And this takes place in the Isle of Royal in Canada. So you can see the moose population starts to go up, and what does the wolf population start to do? The moose population declines, and so does the wolf population. We get the moose population steadily inclining, going up, so does the wolves, but something drastically, maybe disease, maybe it reached the carrying capacity, there wasn't enough food available, so the moose populations dropped down, and initially the wolves are able to survive, but then they take a sudden drop. So we can see that there is a direct correlation with this. In parasitism and disease, the denser the host population, the more easily the parasites can spread from one host to another. So I often think of ticks or fleas. The more animals that you have, the better the chances that you're going to get fleas with that, because they can easily spread. And then the last density dependent is stress from overcrowding. And as you saw again with the high deer populations, there could be fighting. So as stress from overcrowding, we're going to get high levels of stress. Stress weakens an animal's immune system and resistance to disease, and they wind up dropping down in numbers. We're going to stop this screencast here since you just heard the bell ring, and I will pick up with density independent in the next screencast.